I'm a person who stutters, and I've been involved in stuttering communities for about 10 years now. And I also run an account it's mainly on Instagram right now. It's called Stutterology. And it's like my way of being able to help people learn how to self-advocate and also help educate people, especially parents and speech therapists and whoever else is interested in like what are some of the issues that people who stutter face and how we can all best support each other. I actually had originally created Stutterology 2 years ago, and I was going to make like a podcast series for parents, actually, because I would speak at these events as like an adult person who stutters, right? And I would meet these parents. And the parents are where so much of the fear is, you know, when you meet kids who stutter, like sometimes they have a lot of emotional stuff going on, but sometimes they don't, and they're just fine. And it's the parents where there's so much anxiety. And if that's not managed, that anxiety can be taught, you know, to the kid as well. And I think the more we can do to avoid that from happening, like the better off a kid can be, right? And when we focus on things like looking for a cure or trying to get your kid to stop stuttering, but we also know that like there is no cure for stuttering, and that if a preschooler is stuttering, you know, they always talk about this 80% who go on to not stutter anymore. And I'm like, I don't want to hear about the 80% anymore. I want to talk about the 20% of us who do continue to stutter, because that's who I think the parents need to be thinking about too. And the speech therapists need to be thinking about, and everyone needs to be thinking about when they're seeing, you know, these kids. It's like, hey, 20% of these kids, that's not an insignificant amount. 20% of them there's not going to be any type of cure or quote unquote recovery. I don't like that word, but like that's not going to happen, you know? And so what are we going to do? And how are we going to let these messages that we're saying at this point, like, how is that going to impact them if they are part of that 20%? So when I would talk to these parents, when I was on a panel, the biggest thing that they always needed to hear, right, was like, your kid's going to be okay. Like, you know, if you show up for them and you let them talk, like, I'm not saying there won't be hardships. I'm not saying that like there won't be things that come up, but like if you are a safe place for them to come back to, they're going to be so much more okay than anything else you can try to do. So please, like, let go of this concern. I get why you have it. It's valid. It's fair. But try to keep this, you know, away from the kid and realize that they really are going to be okay. So that's kind of actually the start. And then as I started to say these things and spread this message, I started getting a lot of speech therapists who were supporting me, and other people who stutter who were like, man, I needed to hear that. And it struck me like how much this message still is getting lost in translation somewhere, you know. And if you'd asked me 2 years ago, I would have said something like, oh yeah, like fluency goals are okay in speech therapy sometimes, but I don't now. When you ask me, based on, and this is based off of conversations I've had with speech therapists, I've realized no. Like, it's one thing to do, like, it's okay to want that, obviously, and it's okay if, like, you know, you learn tools, techniques that help you speak in a way that you want to speak, but you can't make that like the whole goal. You can't make that the focus. Like, the expectation can't be fluency, you know. It needs to be like, how do we communicate to the best of our ability? How do we help communication be safe, be effective? And that lesson is like revolutionary to a lot of people who stutter, even when I tell them, you know, oh yeah, they're trying to move away the focus of fluency in speech therapy. I've had so many adults who stutter who are like, well, then what do you do? Because that was all we knew and had. I actually was lucky. I started speech therapy for stuttering in 1997. I'd already been in it, but my mom pulled me out right away and was like, this, because I had told my mom, like, this is, I don't like this. I don't like the stuff that she's having me do. And my mom said, okay, then we're not going to go to this person. I'm going to find you someone else. And she pulled me out and she looked for a speech therapist who knew more. And we got lucky that there were people in our area who did knew more. I feel so like privileged that, we were able to find that, especially in the 90s. And I really think that, it wasn't perfect. There were some things that, if I could go back and help them see, I would, obviously. But, compared to what like everyone I know who stutters had, it was much more like progressive, and they had tried to plug us into stuttering communities. I was too afraid already at that point. But yeah, so all of that being said, it's been a very, very eye-opening experience of how necessary these things are. And so that also sums up why I do stutterology, and really where that comes from. Because like with this part I mentioned about people who stutter, my thought with that is, how can we know that we deserve better if we don't like know what that is? If we've never imagined it, if no one's ever painted us a picture of what it could be, then why would we ever think that, right? Like, I feel like that's why so many people who stutter have expressed this shock, because it's never occurred to them that maybe it could be something else. If you have seen the documentary Crip Camp on Netflix, it came out in 2020. Mandy's dying at heart, so I assume you've seen that. Really good and stuff. Highly recommend if you haven't. But for like a quick context, it starts off by talking about a camp that started in 1971, and it's for people with all sorts, and Jody has seen it. It's so good. And it was for people who had all types of different physical disabilities. And the point was that this camp made everything accessible, right? And worked so hard to make things accessible as possible. And one of the quotes that just like hit me so hard during that, because it made me think of, it was a beautiful thing for one, but it also made me think of us as well. It was from I'm gonna butcher his last name, Jimmy Lebreche. I don't know, but he said that this was his experience at the camp. What we saw at that camp was that our lives could be better. The fact of the matter is that you don't have anything to strive for if you don't know that it exists. And it resonated so deeply with me. I think that's something we see in our world a lot, is people who don't know that that it's possible to be a good communicator with a stutter. It's possible that people aren't thinking about your stutter as much as you are. It's possible that if they are, you can tell them, well, that's your problem. It's not my responsibility. Um, and if we don't know that exists, if these possibilities exist, and it's hard to manifest that. The other thing, if you haven't seen that documentary, you're not sure how it connects back to you, is one of the big things that happens is because, with different physical disabilities, there are a lot of things that affect people's speech as well. So even though they're not a person who stutters, right, they have speech disabilities as part of this. And the way that everybody gave each other, I'm not gonna cry because it was really a beautiful thing as somebody who stutters to watch this, right? But the way everybody gave each other time to talk, the way they found, for no matter how like many excuses somebody can make of, oh, it's a burden or this, they were like, we're gonna let people talk, and we're gonna work to make understanding them something the listener is responsible for the most that we can. And it's not always going to be easy, and with different situations there might be different needs that have to come with that. There might be different ways to make that a more accessible experience, but the biggest thing is to listen to that person and to let them speak. And it's just so beautiful. And one of the things that comes out of that, it starts off with this documentary about a camp, but it becomes a whole documentary about the disability rights movement and the power of that. And the like through line of that was that because they were able to imagine an accessible world for the first time, they were able to fight and make it happen and make huge changes in society that we didn't have before. Even though, yes, we still have a long way to go. The difference, like I asked my mom, who was born in 1860, does she remember when she was a kid if like automatic doors, how common those were? And she's like, I remember when they started to install them. Like it was a brand new thing. Buildings didn't have that. And my mom grew up in California. So that stuff now is super required there, right? But so she remembers when that happened. She's like, yeah, as a kid, it was fun, right? It was just like, oh, it's a cool thing. And it benefited people. And we talked about, sometimes your things are heavy or this, and it's such an incredible thing that this group of people were able to make happen, in part because they could envision something different than what the world had handed them. I did not mean to talk about the documentary that much, but it is so good. The other reason I do Stutterology is for me, and that has to be true. I feel like when you're doing any type of like advocacy work, you have to be doing it at least a little bit for you, because if not, burnout is so intense. But I have spent a lot of my life, as a lot of us have, quieting myself, and even though I had an arguably pretty supportive like situation with my childhood, between my mom, who was really cool about my stutter, and but the speech therapist I went to, there were still a lot of messages coming in, and as I got older, it got more and more intense, and I wasn't always able to go to speech therapists who were aware. um and so it became harder for me. And I think that's so telling. I think that's why calling out the particulars matters so much to me too, is that like I had it relatively good. I had it pretty good. The name of the documentary I'm referring to is called Crip Camp. I'll someone could write the name of it in the chat too. That'd be super helpful. Um, thanks, Cameron. And so yeah, it's in part for me as well, and all of those small things, they add up. And even the most resilient of kids, because I would talk back to my speech therapist sometimes. They tried to get me to do the like delayed auditory, and I hated it. And when we were done, my grandma, who was not cool about my stutter at all, she was like, have them do it again, like make them do it again. And the speech therapists were like, I don't know, this kid, because I was like, you're not gonna make me do it. And they were like, okay, we're not gonna force them, like, and I had a speech therapist who kept making me practice the same technique over and over. And I told her I didn't want to do it anymore. I said, I don't like this. And she did not know what to do. I could tell. I remember I was really young. I was like 11, and she was very flustered, and like, she's like, oh, well, let's just finish this page up and then it'll be the end of this session, so I was a pretty resilient kid, but I still ended up feeling really bad about myself for a long time. And so I just think that like those nuances in conversation is so essential, and those small things, they matter so much because they build up. So I have a second half of this, because the other reason that I do it is about hard emotions. And I want to talk about, a lot of us people who don't stutter do grow up being told it's bad to be sad, or bad to cry, or bad to be angry. And I recently, this week, Tuesday through right now, it's happening right now, I had a TikTok video that has exploded. It's got like 1.4 million views right now. It's nuts. And people are being horrendous in the comments. There's also incredible stuff. There's wonderful people. It is a really, really big net of responses, but I've been feeling a lot of anger as well. And not necessarily at every individual, but just at like, why is this happening? How is this happening? And so I want to talk about why anger matters, and how we can channel that to be a benefit. Because even though anger can lead to bad things if we don't manage it in appropriate ways, I also think it can be a way to I think Brene Brown calls anger a catalyst. Like it can really create change in us and create a lot of good things. I think on this schedule, yeah, yeah, Cameron, anger is an energy for sure. I think on the schedule it was saying I'm supposed to switch rooms on the hour. Um, so I'm not sure, but I forgot who's next because I do want to keep an eye on that. Because I have a whole second half, but I was like, am I gonna have to jump rooms in the middle of this? Uh yes, we'll see. But one of the things I thought about with anger and when we're trying to ignore our anger, it reminds me of when we try to repress and ignore our stutter as well. Like repressing it doesn't make it go away, right? It it usually just makes things more complicated for us. Um, I'm like really like not okay. Looks like I have okay. I'm gonna keep going. If I'm supposed to switch rooms, somebody let me know, please. um, okay. So the other oh, okay, cool. Okay, cool. Thank you. I had like an old schedule too, so I wasn't sure. So the other quote I wanted to throw in from Crip Camp is that the reframed anger in a way that I found really fascinating is when I was actually trying to find that first quote, and I reread this quote that's was from Corbett O'Toole, and they said the world, and I know that people who said our experience isn't usually this intense for how it feels like people are reacting to our stutter, but I think there's a feeling in here that really resonates. They said the world doesn't want us around and wants us dead. We live with that reality. So there's always going to be, am I going to survive? Am I going to push back? Am I going to fight to be here? That's always true. So if you want to call that anger, I call it kind of drive. You know, you have to be willing to thrive or you're not going to make it. And that also really meant a lot to me of this, like, okay, you know, just because somebody calls it anger, because it feels like anger, maybe it's also something else too, right? Like if anger is this like because you are reacting to something that is oppressing you, then like call it anger if you want, but like it has so much meaning and purpose, and there should not, in my opinion, be a negative connotation with that. I just thought that was a really kind of it's helpful for me to reframe those kind of things. So the other reasons I find anger really helpful is it can point us to what's wrong, right? So I was getting these comments and I wasn't even like hurt. Like my feelings weren't hurt. And if you are a person who stutters, I do not recommend that you go read these comments. It's not worth it. Imagine mean things people say. I'm sure we've heard something before. And you can fill in the blank. And there are hundreds of these. I've deleted at least like 200 of them. There's still a ton up there. But I'm getting angry, not even on my behalf as much as why is this still a thing? Why are people still doing this? Like, why does anyone think this is okay? You know, like if it's one or two people, it's one thing, but when it's hundreds of comments, it's confusing. And then I was also feeling anger, and I thought this was interesting with people who were giving me advice, quote unquote. So my video, I was at Chipotle, and I started on Chipotle kind of like that, which is what led to a lot of the comments comparing me to a helicopter and a diesel engine in the cold. But I was saying that I used to get a lot of anxiety when I'd walk up to Chipotle or somewhere, wherever, and ask for a cup of water because I almost always stutter on the word water. And that it was really cool to realize that as I walked up this time, I wasn't anxious about it. Like I knew I was gonna stutter on water, right? But like I wasn't anxious. I just knew like it's fine. And I was like, wow, it's really come a long way. So I just made a video to share that with my at that point 100 followers who all know me in real life. Like this was not like meant to make a statement. But I guess it kind of did. But what is interesting to me is even though I was saying this, a lot of comments were like, try saying agua, try saying H2O, do this, ask for an ice cup. Somebody told me, ask for a cup of melted snowman. It was very strange. It was very like, I was like, what are people doing? And so I wanted to make a response video of just like, hey, you guys, I know you were trying to be nice, you're trying to be helpful, but I just told you that I was fine with having a stutter, and now you're telling me not to stutter, and that doesn't feel good. And I said this, and about half the comments on that are people very upset with me, thinking people are just trying to be nice, just trying to be helpful, and you're being mean to them. But most people commented in support, and I have not had a single person who stutters actually have any issue with it. They were like, "Yeah, say it." So I feel good about it. But it really to me pointed to this like interpretation of anger as this always this horrible thing. Even though I was trying really hard not to express anger in a way that would be mean, there is something about this like, okay, listen, like it's it's just the way that I talk, and it's fine. And like, can you guys chill? And for that to be interpreted as me being mean, uh, I just thought that was a really interesting thing, because I don't see anger that way at all. So it can point us to what's wrong. It can empower us to improve things. And I think when you can channel your anger in particular ways, you can even become more hopeful. That's one of the things that I've learned a lot, which is that like and I see Cameron, so there's always going to be asshats, unfortunately. Whatever, like Manny says, anger is part of self-fierce compassion. Adam says anger is pent-up emotions let out. Yeah, and so anger is a mix of things for sure. And I think there are always going to be jerks and stuff. And I think for me it was more just like the amount of it. It was so like, and it wasn't those that upset me as much as those people offering unsolicited advice. But what I do, so I don't think just being angry and going out there and like telling everyone off is going to help. Like I just don't think that that's helpful most of the time. I think what we can do with anger is we sit with ourselves and we go, okay, why am I angry? And we start to like look to the root causes of this. Okay, these people are offering me unsolicited advice. What about this is making me angry? Well, it's making me angry because it's encouraging me to be quieter. It's or even if they don't mean this, right? You don't have to say this to them yet. You can be processing this. They're bad advice that they are acting like I've never considered before, which is really weird because it's like obviously I've thought about all of. Oh, I will say I've never thought about asking for a cup of a melted snowman. That was not a thought that ever crossed my mind, but the other stuff had been. And so I'm like, why is this making me angry? Is this a them problem? So if somebody messages and says, spit it out, or today junior, which is what some of those comments, I'm like, okay, that's an individual issue. Like they're just mean. Like, and there's nothing I can do about that, right? Like at the end of the day, like most of the time. So like I can't do anything. But if somebody's doing something that's like, okay, they're thinking they're helping. Maybe this isn't an individual issue as much as something bigger going on. So what does this reveal to me? It reveals that there are people who think that stuttering is bad on default, that you should always be offering people advice, that they change their words or do this. Well, that's part of a bigger issue, right? Like that's something that's a bigger sign. And so that's one of the things that I do to help me kind of try to pinpoint so that I don't get angry at a person, because I don't necessarily think that's helpful, but I get angry at, okay, well, what's going on? What's the bigger situation? What is systemically the problem? Where is this coming from? Why do people think it's bad? Like, what does this stem from? There's so many answers to that. There's not going to be one answer. But I do feel like this really helps you kind of be able to see more about like, okay, there's a thing in this society that is aiding people to think this way, and we have to ask ourselves, can we do something about this or not? Do we want to do something about this or not? Who else does this impact, right? We kind of like, there's all these different questions and stuff, and it takes a while, and I highly recommend, if you've never dealt with anger, or if you feel like you don't deal with it in a healthy way, to have like a therapist or somebody to like help you with this, because it's hard to work through this, especially when the anger is there, and it takes a long time. That was actually Stutter saying long twice. That was not me emphasizing the word long, but I think it works either way. Um, so, and I do want to point out that like repressing your stutter, I also don't think that's always bad. I actually waited a couple days before I said anything about this post because I was very angry and I didn't want to like lash out. I didn't want it to be something bad. I went to two of my friends who actually are not part of the stuttering world, and I talked to them about it at first, and we kind of worked through, okay, where is this coming from? What is going on? Like what is happening? And what can I help people do about it? How can I actually be helpful in this? And I personally have found this to be really helpful. I have found that when I pushed my anger down all the time, it didn't actually like help me. It just made me feel miserable a lot because I was always pushing it down every day. You know, I would get angry about something and I would just think, can't be angry. I gotta go show up to work and I gotta be happy and I just gotta deal with the world. Uh, and I don't want to do that all the time anymore. You know, I think there's again times and places, and if you prefer that, that's totally that. Like, I don't want to put anyone down, but I realized that was not for me. I was not built that way. I was built to like, okay, I feel this anger. I want it to be valid in the eyes of like how I interact with it. I don't want to put this anger down. It's just an emotion. That's all it is, and it doesn't have control over me. It can help inform me. It can help point me. It can help me get a good idea of what's going on and how things are happening, but it's not in control. And I have just found that to be like unbelievably useful when I'm trying to do some of this advocacy stuff because sometimes I want to snap at people and I want to say something mean back. Um, and I do my best to go back to the space of like, okay, I'm not going to repress the anger, but I'm going to remind myself that I'm not angry necessarily at this one person. I'm angry that people think that this is a normal thing to say or that this is helpful. I'm angry that like all of these things are in place. And so I'm going to channel that. And when I can do that, when I can channel that, it releases it too. And then I don't feel as angry anymore afterwards, which is very, very helpful because it is not fun to be angry all the time. And I do not recommend it. I don't even if you're like channeling it all the time, I think that can lead to burnout and it can be really a problem. So again, there's times and places, there's times you just got to distract yourself, and that's great. I think it can be really helpful because we live in a really hard world. Our brains aren't built to be processing information all of the time, 24/7. I'm not meant to hear 700 people make fun of my stuttering within hours of each other, right? Like we weren't built for that. That's not how we were made. So we don't have to engage with that. We can walk away from that as well. And I think that can be really useful too. I just also think that's depending the situation and how you feel. So um, yeah, that is what I wanted to talk to everybody about. I had like all of these different things that I just have been feeling this last week that I wanted to put together. And I want to read off with one quote from Glennon Doyle, who is not a disabled person, but she is one of my favorite authors. She said, anger delivers important information about where one of our boundaries has been crossed. When we answer the door, so when we listen to the anger, when we answer the door and accept that delivery, we begin to know ourselves better. When we know ourselves, when we know ourselves, we can honor ourselves and restore the boundary that was violated. And when we know ourselves and honor ourselves, we can live with integrity, peace, and power. And I just really liked that. And I also want to remind people too, when we're feeling like I shouldn't be angry about this, I should be grateful they were trying to help. I think, no, it's okay to be angry about discrimination, about microaggressions or straight up aggression. It's okay to be angry about bullying, about inaccessibility, about justice. In fact, I would argue that I think we should feel angry about it. Again, not all the time, not 24/7. We're not built for that. But I think if we never feel angry about, if we tell ourselves we shouldn't feel angry ever, that doesn't actually really make sense. So, okay, I'm gonna pause. if anyone has any questions or thoughts, yes, Cameron, that is Glennon Doyle. That is how you spell it too. Um, Steph.
Just like I told Nicole, I'm going to say something. Excellent presentation. Thank you for this insight. I have seen and followed Stutterology since the beginning. I think even one of the forefront interviews and how um, your platform has shifted. Um, and I'm very, very thankful that I know earlier I commented, and I think you caught it, but I had a post on my social media wall that kind of blew up in a not blew up, but a little bit. And went in directions I did not intend, and I didn't feel well from a health standpoint that day, so I had reasons to delete it. But a lot of people were angry. Stuff, you deleted my work, da da da. And I said, guys, I didn't intend for this. I don't have the spoons today. I'm not well. I'm sorry. Great discussion, just not on my wall today. But thank you for the honor, right? You are a pillar for our community, and so I hope you realize that it's not okay the things that have been said, and I think you do realize that. But at the same time, taking that couple of days back to say, "Wait a minute," is so powerful. I have been the one that's been publicly angry before, and it taught me a lot. It didn't mean that didn't need to feel those feelings, but it meant I need to read that email before I send it. I need to take a step back before I knee jerk respond. And it's quite the lesson to learn when you've done opposite before, right? And I have. And so thank you for that insight, because it's a reminder that, okay, I'm okay in this space. So yeah.
I relate to that a lot. I think that's part of what led me to want to suppress the anger all the time, is because I had that knee jerk reaction and regretted it. Been like, yeah, I shouldn't have said that. I was a little too far. It's something that my therapist, I go to a mental health therapist, and they're amazing. And we talk about like when we're angry and it's for a reason and it's a good reason, the way we present it matters, because we don't want somebody to be able to make an excuse for like us having to be the one to apologize. um Not that it means that like, so the way somebody reacts is wrong or bad or something like that, because it's usually understandable, right? It's like, yeah, that's fair. But it's so much more effective and powerful when we don't have to like be like, okay, yeah, I went a little far, because I've definitely done that. And had to step back and redo it and be like, yeah. So it's something that it's hard. It's hard to work through that. It takes a really long time. And sometimes I've said it and I regret a part of something. And that's life too. Like we're not gonna get it perfect every time, and if we wait until it's perfect every time, we might end up being silent all the time. So sometimes you just gotta make the mistake and you learn from it, and that's all we can do, and we can own that. We can say, I realized that was this. I still think that I had a good point in this. I think my intention was this, but I understand, that I could have done this a different way that maybe would have been more helpful for everybody involved. And that's like the other thing, is a lot of these little language changes, which is a big thing I do on Stutterology too, is so helpful when we're dealing with something that we've always mentally categorized as bad. So one of those things is, instead of saying good or bad about like about emotions or reactions or things that I do, I'll say, oh, that wasn't very helpful, or no, that was helpful, and it's helped my brain take away a lot of the stigma that like my brain has associated. And then we know, with if you follow Stutterology, you've seen my word swap Wednesdays, which play on words. I don't actually mean swap your word for the stuttering reason. It's things like saying, my stutter is bad, and instead saying something like, oh, my, maybe my stutter was a little more prominent today, or something like that. And when we remove this stigma, that can also help us, because then when like we do something that feels off or something, and then when we sit with it and think about what we did, maybe how it could have been different, we're bringing less stigma into that world. I don't know if that made sense, but yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. I definitely don't think we are required to be, engaging in those conversations all the time. I think it is something that someone should do if they feel like they're able to. Uh, we have a right to like our space being our space, Um, but I also know that right now I'm in a place in my life where like I can deal with a lot of stuff. I have a world like that is stable enough. It is funny though, because this week, I'm sorry, but like this week has been very hard. I've been getting off anxiety medicines at the same time that this happens. So it is like testing me. The universe is testing me, but I'm pretty okay. So I really think that goes to show a lot of like the benefit of support and people who are safe for us to fall back on emotionally. Thank you everybody for showing up and hearing me. It really means a lot. And if you don't follow me on Stutterology yet, it's on Instagram. If you don't have Instagram, I am working actually to get all of my posts onto my website. It is a process, but it is in progress right now, and so it's at stutterology.com. If you do not have social